have you ever, like, stopped and thought about trust? This is kind of a weird thing. It's like you can't see it or touch it, but it's holding, well, basically everything together.
Yeah, like all your relationships, your work, like even just walking down the street, really, it's everywhere.
Yeah. But then how do we outwardly, like, build it? That's the hard part.
That's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Exactly. So welcome to another deep dive. We take, a big, complicated idea and try to break it down so you can quickly get to the good stuff.
Yeah, the stuff you can actually use.
Okay, so today we're using this book, The Code of Trust.
By Dreeke. Now, this guy, he's got a seriously interesting background. He was an FBI agent, spent years as a behavioral analyst, and get this, in counterintelligence.
Like spies and stuff.
Exactly. So he knows a thing or two about trust because in his world, the stakes are crazy high.
So no pressure.
Yeah.
Right. But basically, we're going to try to pull out the core ideas from this book and turn them into, like, actionable advice.
Yep. Things you can use whether you're, I don't know, negotiating a deal, figuring out a new area you're working in, or just, like, curious about what makes people tick.
And let's be clear.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about manipulation here.
Right.
This isn't about tricking people or anything.
No way. Dreeke is all about genuine connections. He's talking about leading by building trust, not by, forcing people to do things.
Gotcha. Okay, so first things first, why is trust so important? Joe Navarro, he's another former FBI guy, he wrote the foreword to Dreeke's book. And he asks us to imagine a world without trust.
And that would be chaos, pure chaos.
Right. I mean, like, think about it. No reliable systems, everything's falling apart.
The stuff we take for granted, food safety, transportation, even like emergency services. All because at the root of it all, there's no trust.
That's kind of scary when you really think about it.
It is. And what's even wilder is how fast trust can form nowadays, like with social media and everything, People
make up their minds about you in, like, what, seconds?
Dreeke says seconds or minutes, yeah. It's crazy.
So first impressions are, like, everything.
Absolutely. But here's the thing that Dreeke emphasizes, and I think it's so important. We're all in the people business in a way.
That's interesting.
Right. Like, no matter what your job is, it involves working with other humans.
It's always dealing with someone.
And at the heart of those interactions, trust. Think about it. Even in a totally technical field, you need trust within your team, with your clients.
It's the foundation of everything.
Exactly. And here's the really empowering part. Dreeke says building trust, it's not some magical ability you're born with.
It's not like you have it or you don't.
Nope. He says it's a skill. You can learn it. And he actually developed his whole system by studying leaders who were good at building trust.
Okay, so if it's a skill, that means we can get better at it.
Exactly. Now, before we get into the how-to, there's a really important distinction to make. We're talking about building genuine trust, not manipulating people.
Right, because you hear this phrase sometimes, winning trust.
Yeah, it's like some kind of competition. And that's the opposite of what Dreeke is talking about.
So, what is he saying then?
Okay, get this. The best way to build trust is to genuinely put other people first. You got to focus on their goals and their needs. And then they'll be much more likely to trust you and follow your lead.
Makes sense. Like, you make them feel important and understood, and they, in turn, trust you more.
Exactly. It's about creating genuine connections, not trying to control people. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Dreeke gives us 5 core principles for interactions that build trust. These aren't just fluffy ideas. They're like the actual building blocks of how trust works.
All right, lay them on me.
Number 1, and this is huge, suspend your ego.
What does that even mean?
It means recognizing that everyone you meet, they're the main character of their own story. So let them be in the spotlight.
Don't make it all about you.
Exactly. And humility is key here. You're not trying to prove yourself or be the center of attention. And you know what? When you do that, the other person, they feel safer, more valued, they'll lower their guard, and boom, the whole interaction becomes less like a competition and more like a team effort.
You know what? That reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where Jerry, apologizes for blocking traffic, even though it wasn't totally his fault. And it totally works.
Mm-hmm.
He de-escalates the whole situation. And I've actually used that in real life, like after a minor fender bender.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I knew the other driver was wrong, I just said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And it totally diffused their anger.
Hey, it works. And you know why? Because by letting go of that need to be right, you free yourself up to focus on what you really want out of the interaction and how that aligns with what the other person wants.
Okay, so principle number 1, suspend your ego. Got it. What's next?
Principle number 2 is abandon judgment.
Sounds tough.
It is, but it basically means choosing to respect all opinions, positions, even the ones you totally disagree with. Think about it. Nobody trusts someone who they feel judged by or misunderstood by.
It's like, why would you open up to someone who's just going to, shoot down everything you say?
Right. This isn't just about being polite. It's about genuinely being open to different perspectives, even if they seem weird or wrong to you. When you do that, you signal to the other person that you're actually curious about their world, their reality. And that's a huge trust builder.
It makes me think about something Dreeke mentions about FBI interrogations. He says suspects are often more likely to confess when they feel understood, even about the bad stuff they did.
Yeah, it's like that non-judgmental approach creates a space where they feel safe enough to, let their guard down.
So we've got suspend your ego and abandon judgment. What's the third principle?
All right, principle number 3 is validate others. So even when you disagree with someone, remember that everyone has their own set of rules and values that are important to them.
Like their own internal compass.
Exactly. Understanding and respecting those underlying principles, that's crucial because at the end of the day, everyone wants to feel heard, understood, and like their feelings matter.
Makes sense. Okay, number 4.
Principle number 4 is be reasonable. So this means not taking things personally, not getting overly emotional, not arguing just for the sake of it. Don't exaggerate, manipulate, or trying to force the other person into anything.
So basically be calm and rational.
Exactly. Stick to the facts, be honest, and you'll create a much stronger foundation for trust. Because trust built on fleeting emotions or, God forbid, fear, that's not going to last. Being reasonable, it shows that you're emotionally stable, predictable, and that makes other people feel safe and secure around you.
Okay, makes sense. What's the last one?
Last but not least, principle number 5, be generous.
Interesting. What does that look like in terms of trust?
So Dreeke is pretty clear about this. You often have to trust others first before they'll trust you back.
Kind of like taking the first step.
Exactly. Selfishness pushes people away, but generosity, especially the generosity of trust and willingness to help, that brings people together.
I like that. So those are the 5 core principles, but how do we actually put them into action?
Okay, so Dreeke gives us 4 steps for building what he calls actionable trust.
All right, hit me with the steps.
Step 1 is integrate shared goals.
So figure out what we both want.
Exactly. Think about your own goals for the interaction, then really try to understand and respect the other person's goals, and then the magic happens. You look for ways to align those goals.
So it becomes a win-win situation.
Exactly. When everyone feels like they're working towards something together, that's when trust really starts to blossom.
That makes sense. Okay, step number 2.
Step 2 is understand their world. Dreeke calls this context, and it goes way deeper than just knowing someone's job title or basic info.
So like really getting to know them.
Yeah, you want to try to understand their desires, beliefs, personality traits, how they usually behave, even their social status. You got to see the world through their eyes, understand their background, and how they see you within all of that.
It's like trying to navigate a foreign country, right?
Yeah.
You need to understand their customs and language.
Perfect analogy. And remember, understanding their world isn't about changing them. It's about meeting them where they are.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So understand their world. What's step 3?
Step 3 is arrange successful encounters. This is super important for first meetings.
Because first impressions matter so much.
Absolutely. So you got to be really intentional and plan carefully. Think about the environment, the atmosphere, the timing, the location, how you're going to start the conversation, what your goals are, and what you can offer them that they'd actually value.
This reminds me of something I heard about Jesse Thorne, that radio guy, amazing interviewer. He'd pick a specific type of restaurant for his interviews, one that was comfortable, not too loud, good for conversation. Like, he knew the environment could totally influence how the interview went.
Exactly. Little details can make a big difference. All right, ready for step 4?
Hit me.
Step 4 is build rapport. And this is about speaking the same language, literally and figuratively. You got to be rational, respectful, considerate of their perspective.
So no jargon or talking down to them?
Nope. Dreeke's big on using language that's free of arrogance, criticism, and definitely no selfishness. The focus should always be on the other person and how they're experiencing the interaction.
Okay, so those are the 4 steps. It's funny. It sounds a lot simpler than I thought it would be.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. But it does take effort and a conscious decision to approach your interactions this way.
Makes sense. So Dreeke gives this really interesting example in the book called DAC in Action. It's about how he met this guy named Cliff in South Beach. And he just, started chatting with him, was genuinely curious about Cliff's kayak rental business, even offered to help him with something.
And you know what? That little act of kindness, that real interest, it created enough rapport that later, when Dreeke needed a small favor, Cliff was more than happy to help. He even gave him some inside information.
So being nice and helpful actually paid off later.
Exactly. And get this. That seemingly random interaction with Cliff, it actually led to a much bigger encounter with this guy named Terrence Thibault Boney.
Who's that?
So Boney was involved in some shady intelligence stuff, but Dreeke approached him naturally, found some common ground, made a joke about himself, and showed genuine interest in Boney's work.
You're telling me this random chat was like the start of something big?
Yeah. Dreeke actually calls it the beginning of the end for Boney's spy activities. Pretty crazy, right?
That's wild. It shows you that even small interactions, if you handle them right, can have huge ripple effects.
Totally. Now, Dreeke is also honest about his own, early struggles with all this. He tells these funny stories about when he was younger and trying to connect with people at, a shopping mall and a party. And he realized he was so focused on himself, on his own real-life story, that he wasn't really engaging with the other person at all.
Uh-huh. We've all been there.
Right. You go into a conversation wanting to make a good impression, and you just end up talking about yourself the whole time.
So how did he turn things around?
He had this huge realization. The key to being liked and trusted isn't about how others feel about you. It's about how you make them feel about themselves.
That's deep.
Right. He specifically mentions his wife, Kelly, and how things shifted in their relationship when he started really focusing on her experiences and her perspectives.
So it's not about being the star of the show. It's about making the other person feel like the star.
Exactly. All this talk about trust, it's really relevant to what's going on in the world right now.
What do you mean?
Well, there's this huge crisis of distrust happening. Dreeke talks about how trust in major institutions like businesses, the government, the media, it's been plummeting, especially since the Great Recession.
Yeah, you don't have to look far to see that. People are skeptical of, everything.
And the stats are pretty crazy. Trust in the federal government, it's down to 20%.
Wow, that's low.
And trust in big business is even lower, 19%. And it's not just institutions, even trust among friends has taken a hit.
So basically, we're all just suspicious of each other.
It's a problem, especially for younger generations like millennials. Only a tiny percentage of them believe that most people can be trusted. And Dreeke is right when he says we got to rebuild trust if we want society and the economy to function properly.
Okay, so trust is declining, but how do we even start to rebuild it?
Well, Dreeke gives this cool counterintelligence example to show how these principles can work even in high-pressure situations. He talks about this meeting he had at Tom's restaurant, the one from Seinfeld, with this human source.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Right. So this source was a PhD candidate in cryptography, and he might have had vital info about this military advisor from a former Soviet republic who they suspected was working for Russia or who knows who else.
Okay, this sounds serious.
It was. But what's so interesting is how Dreeke uses those trust-building principles we talked about. He focuses on the source's expertise, asks him questions, validates his knowledge, even though he doesn't fully get all the technical cryptography stuff. He tries to find common ground, even though he kind of fumbles it when he mentions Wayne Gretzky, and the source is more familiar with another athlete.
Even the FBI messes up sometimes.
Right. But that's the thing. Dreeke points out that those little imperfections, they actually make him seem more human, more relatable, and that can actually build trust.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about being genuine.
Exactly. And he even offers the source a tangible incentive, like budget for information.
So he puts his money where his mouth is, literally.
Right. And it all comes back to that central idea. Building trust isn't about magic tricks or complex strategies. It's about consistently applying those simple principles, focusing on the other person, their needs, and their perspective.
Okay, so let's recap those principles one last time. Suspend your ego, abandon judgment, validate others, be reasonable, and be generous.
And the 4 steps to put those into action. Integrate shared goals, understand their world, arrange successful encounters, and build rapport.
Got it. It seems like a lot to remember, but really it's just about shifting your mindset and approaching your interactions with intention.
Totally. And here's something to think about as you go about your day. Pick one interaction you're going to have today and try consciously applying just one of these principles or steps.
Like a little experiment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See how it shifts the dynamic, how it affects the way you connect with that person. You might be surprised at the results.
I love that. So if anyone's interested in learning more about this, definitely check out The Code of Trust by Robin Dreeke.
It's a fantastic resource. And, it might even spark an interest in behavioral science in general.
Yeah, learning about how people think and behave, it can be super helpful in all areas of life.
Absolutely. All right, so we've given you the tools. Now it's time to go out there and start building those stronger, more meaningful connections. You got this.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Catch you next time.
See ya.